Hey everyone, welcome to our very first current events update of the school year. I'm having some mic issues, I'm wondering, and so I'm actually just want to confirm, if you can hear me, can you just put in the chat box that yes, you can hear me? I just want to make sure that people are hearing me. Cool. Fatima, can you hear me now? Okay, so it looks like people are hearing me. Okay, perfect. So, welcome. So, this is going to be the first of a weekly current events and 2020 election update that we will be doing with you typically on Monday evenings. And most weeks it's going to be me and my co-streamer Fatima, who's also done this course before, and maybe you've also been in one of her streams. She's doing an awesome job with the work that she's doing for AP Gov. And maybe you've been in a stream that I've casted before. But this week, we want to kind of get things kicked off. I wanted some time to put it out there to you. But typically, this stream will happen every Monday night from 8:30 p.m. to 9:15 p.m. And maybe sometimes we'll go a little bit over if you have questions. But really, what we're just going to be talking about here are the major events that are happening in our country, sometimes the world, and really what's going on with the 2020 election update. Even though you're not going to be tested on specific current events on the AP exam, being able to look at current events and apply the knowledge that you have about our government to them makes it so much better off for you and makes you really force your brain to use that material that you're getting. Plus, it just makes you a really good citizen. And you probably have questions about some of the things that you see in the news, and this is going to be a great time where we're going to be able to share some of those big things and then hopefully break it down for you. So I really want to encourage you as the night goes on, if we're talking about something, just to put a question in the chat box or whatnot, and we'll answer those questions to our best of our ability. So let's get started here. So, couple quick things. This is our upcoming schedule for the next week, okay? This is our last AP Gov stream of the week because we are now streaming always on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So that way you can always predict when AP Gov is going to be. I could almost guarantee you that every Tuesday and Thursday night at 7 p.m. there will definitely be a stream, and most nights it will be followed by another at 8 p.m. just depending on what's going on. So next week coming up, Monday, of course, we'll be back with you for another current events update. And then Tuesday, we'll be looking at the roles and powers of the president. Fatima actually will be doing that one. And then at 8 p.m. that night, we'll follow it up with checks on the president's power. And then on Thursday at 7 p.m., we'll be looking at political socialization and ideology. Because, you know, some of you are at different places and some of your teachers are teaching this course in just a little bit of a different way. So those are some things to keep in mind as we go towards next week. So what are we going to do tonight? Well, we're going to update you on what's going on. And on the current events side, I'm going to be taking you through the current events, and then Fatima's going to be taking you through what's going on in the election world. But we'll both be here for the whole time tonight. So current event-wise, really our time tonight is going to be spent on what is going on with the president and in Congress, and what is impeachment, because probably many of you don't know yet because you haven't got that far in the course. And so I'm going to break down for you exactly what is happening, what the accusations are against the president, what the implications of that, how long it's going to take, what Congress can do. That's what we're going to be looking at in this first part of tonight's presentation. So let's get rolling here. So I'm going to take a wild guess that most of you have heard of at least the name Mueller, okay, or Robert Mueller. So you probably remember back in 2016, there were all sorts of allegations around the 2016 election that the Russians were interfering with the election. Now, maybe you have wondered, like, what does interference mean? So a lot of times, like my students, interference, sometimes to them, they actually thought that it meant that the Russians were like hacking into voting systems, you know, and changing votes. That's really not what was happening. So there were questions around interference with the election with the Russians. There was also questions around whether the Trump campaign in 2016 collaborated in any way with the Russian government. okay, to try to win the election. So very shortly after President Trump was inaugurated in 2016, or excuse me, 2017, they initiated a special prosecutor who was Robert Mueller to come aboard and basically conduct this investigation. And it has taken just about 2 years to do the work of that investigation. Now, quick background on Robert Mueller. He's not new to government. He's worked for several Republican administrations before. He's got a long history in the Department of Justice. And has worked on other special cases, in some ways similar or high-profile cases like this before. He ended up working with a team of 19 different lawyers, most of which came from the current Justice Department, which was, of course, appointed by the current president, and then a few others which he hired on. So basically, a lot of people, especially last year, we're like, why is this taking so long? We keep hearing about this investigation, but nothing's coming out. Well, that's really a good thing. You don't want to rush something like this because you want to get your facts straight. So in about April, May of last year, it was right towards the end of the school year, the Mueller report was released. But of course, because he worked for the Department of Justice, he took his report to the Attorney General, who is the same Attorney General that is in office right now, Attorney General William Barr, or sometimes you hear him on the news called Bill Barr, okay? Attorney General Barr took about a week with that report, and he went through, and you kind of see it there in the bottom picture, he went through and blacked out certain sections of it, okay, which he felt were classified materials that Congress shouldn't necessarily see, okay? And that, of course, really upset a lot of Democrats in Congress who wanted to see the full extent of the report. And so as a result, they asked Mueller to come and testify in front of Congress over the summer. And that's exactly what he did. He spent one day testifying for hours and hours and hours. You can find plenty of YouTube videos if you're interested, or just the highlights online in front of Congress. One of the things that Congress had a question on is Mueller basically what he did was he came to the conclusion that, yes, the Russians meddled in the election, okay, in 2016. And the way that they did that was mostly through social media, where they were creating all of these sorts of fake pages that were putting out fake news, okay, to influence people to vote for the Trump Trump candidate, or to influence people to not really like Hillary Clinton, okay? And so he says, there's plenty of evidence, and he gives it in his report of that did happen. Now, he analyzes what happens with the Trump campaign, and he says, really, there's not enough evidence there at this point that now President Trump actually himself worked with the Russians. Now, other people in the campaign, they did, and some of those people have been prosecuted and have now gone to jail, and some are still awaiting prosecution. The third thing, though, that ended up becoming a question really after the investigation began was, did President Trump obstruct justice as the investigation was going over? So what does it mean to obstruct justice? Basically to interfere with an investigation. And so Mr. Mueller basically laid out all the evidence, okay, and then said to Congress and to the Attorney General, here's the evidence. I'm not going to make a decision on that, whether or not he obstructed justice, because he felt that he was not able to due to a memo of the Department of Justice, and I'll talk about that here in just a second. So I saw the question, what does this mean? I think you were referring to when we said about Mueller testified in front of Congress. So basically, through the committee system in Congress, Congress has the ability to subpoena people to appear in front of them. If you receive a subpoena, it means that you must appear. It's required by law. And so that's exactly what happened is they subpoenaed him. They've subpoenaed many other people, and actually I'll talk about that too here in just a minute. And he had to testify in front of Congress to basically answer Congress's question about his reports. So one of the problems, though, that the committee has faced is the president's use of executive privilege. And really, this is something we'd cover later in the year, but since this is a government class, and most of you probably are in AP government, you probably should know, okay? So President Trump is using an implied power in the Constitution, basically in Article 2, that he has something called executive privilege. He's not the first one to use this. This is very common. Many presidents have utilized this idea of executive privilege, going all the way back to George Washington. So basically, the idea is that presidents think that in order to do their job, they need really candid advice from their aides, meaning advice that's not, that's the full truth, okay? And aides simply won't be able to give them that advice, or won't be willing to give them that advice, if those aides might know that they have to be called to testify under oath before a congressional committee or some other forum. So basically what the president can do is they can issue executive privilege and basically say, look, this is one of my aides. They've talked to me. Typically, it's around national security issues, and they don't have to testify in front of Congress because of executive privilege. Now, President Nixon also utilized that. And one of your required courses for the AP Gov exam is U.S. versus Nixon. So again, it's probably just as smart for me to talk about it right now. But the idea is that President Nixon was ordered to hand over tapes of his phone calls in the Oval Office, and he also just bugged the Oval Office. He did that. Why? Because basically he wanted to screw his political enemies. And so Nixon said, no, I'm not handing you over the tapes of these calls, where he basically told a group called the Plumbers that they should, bust down the door of the Watergate building, which is the DNC headquarters in D.C. at the time, and basically try to get some dirt on the Democrats so he could win the next election. So that's on phone. So obviously he didn't want to give over the phone records. Well, the court says, yes, the president and U.S. Nixon has executive privilege authority, but it is not absolute. Okay. And when it's around a criminal trial, there are certain things that outweigh the interest of the judiciary and ensuring that there's a fair trial with full factual disclosure. And so Nixon had to turn over those tapes. And of course, not long after that, Nixon would resign. So the reason I share this view is because President Trump has been utilizing executive privilege to prevent a lot of people from appearing in front of Congress. So can a sitting president be indicted? Okay, well, first off, what does it mean to be indicted? You might have looked at it and said indicted. Well, this is a great reason why you take Gov, so you learn how to pronounce words. And you sound smart when you talk to people. So indicted just means to be charged with a crime. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're guilty, because you have to go to trial first. So the short answer to that is it depends on who you ask. Okay. Some people might say, yes, a president can be indicted, a sitting president. Others might say, no, they can't. Okay. But right now, the general theme that most people are saying is no, including Mr. Mueller, and which is why he did not come to a decision whether or not President Trump obstructed justice. It goes back to 1973 when the Justice Department issued a memo that basically said a sitting president can't be indicted. Okay, well, they reissued that memo, okay, or reaffirmed it in 2000, basically saying that nothing really has changed in the years since 1973, since we put out this memo. A president is constitutionally immune, and they can't be charged with a crime while they're in office. Basically, they felt that if a president could be charged for a crime while in office, that it would violate the separation of powers, and basically anybody could go after the president at that point. It's interesting, though, because if you pay attention to those years, 1973, 2000 are both years that the sitting president was under investigation for possible impeachment. Okay, and so it's interesting that the years that those memos came out were then. So that's why Mr. Mueller did not make a decision on whether or not President Trump obstructed justice. So then in the last week or so, the crap really has hit the fan. I don't really know how else to say that. And specifically, what has happened is we had somebody called a person that we classify as a whistleblower come forward. Okay, so the whistleblower actually came forward in early August, but you and I just learned about it with the rest of America here really relatively recently. Okay, so basically this whistleblower is somebody that works in the intelligence community, and you're not going to hear me say he, she, or a name because we still don't know who that person is. And they filed a complaint with the Inspector General of the intelligence community, whose name is Michael Atkinson, who also is an appointee of President Trump. Okay. Now, what is a whistleblower? Okay. So basically, a whistleblower is a person who learns of unethical or even illegal activity within their company or government, and then they report it. Okay. Because or they refuse to participate in it. And the reason why is because they see it as corrupt or as unconstitutional or as breaking the law, something of that nature. And so basically this whistleblower in early August felt that he had been or she had been given information or had seen something, him or herself. And as a result, they felt that there was something that to be reported here. And so they took it to Michael Atkinson, who you're seeing there on the top of the slide. So by law, the Inspector General has to review the whistleblower complaint and decide whether or not it's credible and urgent, okay? If he decides it's not, the whistleblower can go around him and can just go straight to Congress with their complaint. But if he decides it is credible, he has to send it to the Director of National Intelligence within 14 days, and then the Director of National Intelligence has to send it to Congress within 7 other days. So Atkinson, again, a Trump appointee, which I think is important to highlight here, you know, he got his job because of the president, felt that whatever this whistleblower had to say was really credible and really urgent. And so he said, okay, we got to move this forward, okay? But the thing that he did, which was kind of different, he took it to Attorney General Barr, okay, who decided not to send it to Congress. And he said that the reason why they weren't going to send it to Congress was that there were indications of an arguably political bias in favor of Trump's political opponent, and also relied on hearsay to file the allegations. Hearsay basically means like rumor or, you know, somebody else told it to you secondhand. You weren't actually there. So today, one thing that just came out literally this morning was that part where it says an arguably political bias, the reason they said that about the whistleblower, because apparently the whistleblower is a registered Democrat. And so as a result, they said, well, he's biased against the president automatically because he's a Democrat, hence why they didn't send it forward. Well, it leaked to the news. And when it leaked to the news, people basically demanded that made it to Congress. The Democrats in the House especially wanted to see what was actually going on. So we end up finding out that the big concern in the whistleblower complaint is a call that President Trump had with the Ukrainian president earlier this month, and the Ukrainian president's name is President Zelensky, okay? So on this phone call, President Trump emphasized to Ukraine the amount of financial aid the United States gives to the country. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, okay? And actually, just a couple days prior to this phone call, President Trump had decided to withhold Ukraine's payment from the United States, okay? And so on the transcript, it says this: "I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country's been through a lot and Ukraine knows a lot about it," Trump said. He then soon added the other thing. There's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution. A lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the attorney general would be great. It sounds horrible to me. So long story short, how does Biden related to this? So President Biden's son, one of his sons, is involved with a gas company in Ukraine. He sits on the board of that gas company. And Ukraine's chief lawyer recently was investigating that gas company and for corruption, things like that. And basically what they wanted, what some people wanted to see happen was Biden's son to go after, okay? However, at this point, they haven't found any wrongdoing in any of the pieces of that company. So the issue that Democrats have with this phone call is the idea of, was this quid pro quo, which basically means you scratch my back and I'll scratch your back. So the idea is, did President Trump ask for a favor, basically implying like, hey, do this investigation on Biden's son, excuse me, and if you do that, I'll release your money and give that to you, okay? If that's the case, well then, you know, that could be an illegal offense, okay, depending on who you ask, okay? And so that's the question. Now, I can give a little update here. So just this morning on the news, President Trump seemed to do this. Well, not seemed, he did do this. He said that on the news that he was asking Ukraine again and China, right on public news, you can look up the clip, to investigate Biden's son. So this time he was definitely asking for that, which is concerning for a lot of legal scholars and just people in general, because it's him asking another country to investigate one of his domestic political opponents. So that's the concern there. So quickly after that, last week, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi announced the impeachment inquiry in the House. Okay, Ashley, I just saw your piece on how was this illegal. Can you tell me what specifically you were asking? What was illegal? And then as soon as I see that, I'll answer your question. So, anyways, Speaker Pelosi asked, I'm thinking of the question. Speaker Pelosi announces the House will now basically officially go through the impeachment inquiry process, marking it only the fourth time in American history that a president has been investigated for impeachment. We've only had two that's been impeached: Andrew Johnson, who's the first one on the screen, and Bill Clinton, the last one there. Richard Nixon wasn't. Why? Because he left office before he could. So this was a big deal because really for months and months and months, Democrats have been calling on Speaker Pelosi to start impeachment proceedings. But she has really waited and waited and waited. She knows, because the House is controlled by the Democrats, that really it's a foregone conclusion. The House can impeach him, okay, which all impeachment means is just to say that there's wrongdoing against the president. It does not mean that they're going to be removed, okay? So the House can impeach him, but at the end of the day, the Senate's controlled by the Republicans, and they will never find him guilty, okay, and remove him from office, because the Senate's the one that has the power to remove. So basically, the value of impeachment is symbolic, okay, and proceeding only makes sense when the symbolism outweighs the practical political pitfalls, including the risk of losing Democratic seats in the House. So basically, she's taken that risk. And in fact, Democrats who are in districts that are very vulnerable have also said, we need to do this now. That's how bad they see this as being. So how is he asking for an inquiry of Biden's son illegal? Because that is a political opponent of his, okay? So Joe Biden is a political opponent of his. I mean, Joe Biden right now is one of the front runners for the Democratic nomination. And so it would be illegal to, as president of the United States, okay, not as a private citizen, but as president of the United States, because you're using the power of your office to ask the leader of a foreign country to conduct an investigation on your political opponent. Okay, because you're using the power of your political office to benefit your own campaign. So that's the legality part that's there. So what actually happens with the impeachment process? Well, the Constitution says you can only be impeached for three things: treason, bribery, and high crimes and misdemeanor. So of the ones here, the ones that could be used against the president once the articles of impeachment are actually written up, probably are bribery and high crimes and misdemeanors. And it's not just going to be the whistleblower piece. The whistleblower piece is going to be one part of many parts. The Mueller report or the obstruction of justice will probably be in there. Once that happens, it goes to the House Judiciary Committee, who basically debates it. And then if they move it forward, it goes to the House of Representatives, who to impeach a president, all they need is a majority vote. So 51% of the House members, okay? And then at that point, once someone has been impeached, okay, like Andrew Johnson was or Bill Clinton was, it goes to the Senate. The Senate actually is the one who holds the trial, okay? They have to hold the trial. That's by Constitution, whether they want to or not, okay? And the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court basically oversees that trial, and the Senate is the jury. They look at evidence, all the different things around it, and then they have a vote. 2/3 of the senators, or 67 of the 100 senators, have to vote to remove the person from office in order for that to actually happen. It's a very high number. It's one of those constitutional protections to ensure that just because we don't like someone, they're not thrown out of office. So no president in American history has ever been has ever been removed. Two have been impeached, but no president has actually ever been removed. Now, I'll tell you, Andrew Johnson only got away by one vote. Had one more senator voted for for removal, he would have been removed. Let me just look at this question here from Brandon. If someone gets state permanent. Okay, that's a great question, Brandon, and I'm actually getting ready to come right up to it. So what all has happened this week? Okay, so Secretary of State Mike Pompeo confirmed that he was on the July call between Trump and President Zelensky in Ukraine. Okay, soon after that call was made, at first we were told, the White House told us that there wasn't a recording, and now apparently there was a recording, but they moved it into a highly classified computer system, basically restricting almost any access to it. So we can't actually get the recording, which some people are like, well, why do we need the recording? Because the transcript was released. Yes, the transcript was released, but it was released by the White House, okay, who could, if they wanted to, change that transcript, okay, however they would want. Last week, also, President Trump compared the person whoever gave the whistleblower their information to a spy. And he said, you know what we used to do to spies? We handled it a little bit differently. Basically implying, and you can imply however you want to imply that, but many have said, well, is he calling for the execution of somebody that gave this whistleblower the information? And then the State Department Inspector General, because all the government departments have their own Inspector General, provided Congress with documents today, actually, that included materials from President Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, that he had given to the department earlier this year, basically containing unproven claims about Vice President Biden and his son, Hunter. So that's how Giuliani's been connected into this. And there's lots of questions around that, too, because he's a private lawyer. So what's a private lawyer doing, getting himself involved in things that are, issues of state, okay? Because he's not an official employee of the government. He's an employee, or I shouldn't say employee. He is being paid by President Trump for personal lawyer services. So I don't know in general about, does it affect the legality of Trump's investigation request of Joe Biden? I think that really, Brandon, that's a question that's TBD, to be determined. And then today, the last thing, so President Trump publicly asked Ukraine and China to investigate the Democratic frontrunner Joe Biden this morning on television. You can go look on YouTube or what if you want. And basically by doing that publicly, he kind of is inoculating himself from the potential bombshell coming out in the press of what actually occurred during that call. And he can claim that was nothing wrong about the request because he just made it openly and publicly in front of the cameras. In addition, an IRS official filed a complaint today alleging that he was told that at least one Treasury Department official tried to interfere with an audit of President Trump's or Vice President Pence's tax returns. And so basically what you've started to see happen is now that one whistleblower has come forward, all sorts of people in the government are coming forward and saying like, well, here's something that illegal that supposedly happened, and here's something else, and here's something. I think you're going to see a lot of that because people who maybe have been scared for some reason before are now going to kind of come out. Okay, so that's what's going on current events-wise in the news. And for the last little bit of time, I'm going to kick it over to Fatima, who's going to talk about what's going on in the election world right now.
Yeah, okay. Hi, guys. So like you said, I'm Fatima, and so I'm going to be talking about what's happening in terms of like the 2020 elections. And so we're going to be talking both about the Democratic primaries, which have been getting a lot of coverage in the news, but we're also going to be talking about the Republican primaries because there are other candidates that are choosing to run against President Trump. And we haven't really been talking about them, but I think it's important to cover who those people are and how they're challenging them. So just to dive into that, I'm going to explain a little bit about the primary process. And so the way that primaries work is it's pretty much the national party's way of ensuring a candidate is chosen by the people, right? So a Democratic primary is going to choose who the national Democratic candidate
we're going to give Fatima a minute here. She's been struggling tonight because there's really bad storms where she's at. And so her internet's been having some issues here. So I'm just going to give her a minute here to see if she can.
And so first look at the Democratic primary debates. The Democratic National Committee, which is pretty much the committee that runs all of the primary election process for the Democratic Party, it has a bunch of different qualifying criteria for the October debates. So if you've been keeping up with what's been happening in the Democratic primary world, you would know that we had debates in both July and September. And so both of those, the criteria to qualify was set by the Democratic primary, by the Democratic National Committee. And so the qualifying criteria for this recent October deadline, which happened just in the past week, was to get 130,000 unique individual donors and to get 2% support in at least 4 qualifying polls. And so what individual unique donors are is pretty much grassroots donors. So this means that 130,000 different people have to donate to your campaign. And so knowing that, we can also look at what 2% in 4 qualifying polls is. So the Democratic National Committee defined these qualifying polls as first polls from early primary states. So that's states that get a lot of attention, like Iowa and North Carolina and New Hampshire. And it's also polls that are conducted nationally. So polls that are conducted all across America, and polls that specifically focus on early primary states. Getting 2% in either of those would get you halfway to qualifying for the October debate. So the reason why the Democratic National Committee is actually making it harder and harder to qualify for these debates is because it wants to winnow the field. Because if you've even been keeping up with what's happening with the Democratic 2020 primary, it might be very difficult to keep up with how many people that are running, because it feels like every Democrat that's over the age of 30 has decided to jump into the field. So the DNC wants to reduce the amount of infighting that happens when it comes to actually selecting who the national representative for the Democrats is. So there are 12 people who qualified for the October debate. And so those people are Senator Amy Klobuchar, former Representative Beto O'Rourke, Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator Kamala Harris, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Andrew Yang, Cory Booker, former VP Joe Biden, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, Julian Castro, and Representative Tulsi Gabbard, and Tom Steyer, a former hedge fund investor. So there's a lot of people who aren't very nationally recognized on this list. And so we won't be focusing on them in this stream, but just know that Andrew Yang works in Silicon Valley, and I guess that's been interesting for him. So there's also another side to this. There's still people who consider themselves to be in the running for the Democratic nomination, but these people didn't qualify for the October debates. And those people are Michael Bennet, Marianne Williamson, Wayne Messam, Steve Bullock, Tim Ryan, John Delaney, and Tom Stizak. So all of these people, they're still trying to run for president and get the Democratic nomination, but they haven't been able to actually qualify for the October debate. And so the reason why qualifying for the debates is so critical to actually getting the nomination is because it pretty much sets the tone for who is getting media attention. Like a lot of the times, these debates generate like clips and news moments that end up being talked about for the coming weeks until the next debate. So they really set the tone for who actually is getting to be a big part of the national conversation. And so now that we know that, let's talk about the 3 major candidates that are running in the Democratic primary. And so they're known as like the big 3 in a lot of the media that covers them. And so the first is Joe Biden. And so he was President Obama's vice president. And so by a lot of people in the news, he's considered the front runner. And so in a lot of early polls, he's been polling ahead of people like in double digits even in front of other people that are running. And so one of the main things that he's talked about in the debates and part of his campaign is that he wants to build on President Obama's legacy. And so what he's trying to do when he talks about building on President Obama's legacy is really invoke that positive image and like feeling that people associated with President Obama. And so he talks about wanting to expand Obamacare and not wanting to enact universal health care. And he sort of frames that in a way that he like really supports what President Obama did. So he wants to continue that legacy and not try to just start over with something completely new. And so on the other hand, we also have Bernie Sanders, who is also running for the Democratic nomination. And so one of the most major things about him is that he ran in 2016 against Hillary Clinton, and he considers himself to be a democratic socialist. So what that pretty much means is that he wants to enact policies that have more socialist tendencies like universal healthcare, but he wants to maintain America and make sure that it's still a democratic system that we have right now. So we're still having elections and stuff like that. And so he's really known for being one of the most progressive people that's running right now, if not the most progressive. And so Bernie Sanders is a big contender in this primary because he gained a lot of support in 2016 when he ran against Hillary Clinton. So he went from being someone who wasn't known on the national stage at all to someone who built the biggest donor base from the United States. And all of those people were grassroots donors, and none of it was money from like big corporate entities. So he really gained a legacy when he ran in 2016. And so the last person that's considered to be a really significant contender for the nomination is Senator Elizabeth Warren. And so she's also known for her progressive agenda. And a lot of the policies that she's interested in and wants to enact if she's elected and chosen for the nomination are similar to what Senator Bernie Sanders says. So they work together a lot in Congress, and she's also like sponsored his bill for universal health care. But one of the main differences between her and Bernie Sanders is that she maintains that she's a capitalist. So she doesn't really associate herself with like being a democratic socialist, but still maintains that she wants to focus on a capitalist system. So she really is a big advocate for healthcare and economic reforms. And so those are the main things to know about her in terms of why she's a member of the big three. Okay, so now that we know that, we're going to move into some of the bigger things that have happened in the past week regarding the Democratic primary. So the first is about Senator Bernie Sanders. So he recently was hospitalized, and so he had to undergo heart surgery because he had a blocked artery. And so the surgery was successful, and he got 2 stents that were inserted in order to like clear the blockage and make sure that his heart kept working. But the impact of that was his campaign had to cancel a few events, and they like postponed the purchases of some TV ads in Iowa to happen until after his procedure. So it kind of like slowed down his campaign a little bit, but his campaign and like they've been saying that they're going to get back on track as soon as he's out of the hospital and like doing fine. And so they've also said that he is doing fine and he's talking, and so he's in good health. But the important thing to remember is he is 78 years old, which makes him the oldest candidate in the race. And every single member of the big three, fun fact, is also going to be the oldest president that is like actually inaugurated if they're elected president. So now that we know that, there's also some interesting things that have been happening in terms of Elizabeth Warren's like selfies. So one of the interesting things that she's been doing is she literally spends hours after each rally taking selfies with anyone who wants to stay long enough afterwards to get that picture. And so in some places, like just recently in New York and Manhattan, it took more than 4 hours for everyone to get a picture. And so she stays there and like gets that picture, make sure everyone like leaves with a memento. And so like she's not only known for having a plan for like everything, she's also taking a lot of pictures to really memorialize the support that she's getting. And so this isn't just a choice she's making in order to like get a lot of pictures on the internet. It's also a very strategic move in terms of her campaign, because it allows the campaign to send a message that she's a grassroots candidate and that she really cares about voters and wants to connect with them. So if you think about it, if hundreds of people leave with a photo of Elizabeth Warren and they post it on their social media, that's a way for her to spread her message. And so it's not only something that's really cool, like you're getting a photo with a presidential candidate, but it also is a tool for her campaign to employ in order for her to garner more support across the United States. So now that we've looked at how Elizabeth Warren selfies have been trending on Twitter and pretty much everywhere else, we can look to the other side of the aisle and what's been happening in the Republican primary. So President Trump is running again for the 2020 election, but there's also 3 other Republicans that have decided to join the race. So the first is former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld. And so I ran in 2016, and he was the vice president candidate for the Libertarian nominee. And so he identifies as someone who leans as a libertarian. And so what it means to be a libertarian is that you are more progressive or have a tendency to associate yourself with like more democratic views of social policy. So that might be things like gay marriage, but you are more conservative and identify more with Republicans when it comes to the government not having a huge role in every single person's life. So that's Governor Bill Weld. And so the second person that's running is former Representative Joe Walsh. And so he's from Illinois, and he identifies as like a straight conservative. And so he's also been a radio host. So he has a following from having been in the media in the past. And so he's built that up over the past few years. And so the last person that's running is former Representative Mark Sanford. He's from South Carolina, and he is also very conservative. And so he was a member of the Freedom Caucus when he was in the House of Representatives. And so that's pretty much just a coalition of Republicans that has like formed their bloc in order to further their conservative ideologies. So they all have significant followings. And so they're all trying to challenge President Trump for the nomination for the Republican ticket. And so what's been happening recently with the Republican primary in terms of the news is they had their first primary debate. And so only 2 of these challenger non-incumbent candidates decided to participate, and President Trump also did not participate. So those 2 candidates were former Governor Bill Weld and former Representative Joe Walsh. And so the thing to know about this debate was that it was live streamed by Business Insider on Facebook, and it was an unsanctioned debate. So not a lot of people tuned into it, and that's why it hasn't really been something that everyone's talking about in the news. So if you haven't heard of it, that's really not true, because it wasn't widely covered. And the reason why that was because it was an unsanctioned debate, because the Republican National Committee wasn't actually planning on having any primary debates, because they felt like the candidate that they would potentially have, who would be President Donald Trump running with Mike Pence, was a strong candidate. So they didn't feel the need for it. And so on top of that, many like states that traditionally have like Republican populations, they just canceled their primaries, because if the Republican National Committee wasn't planning on having any debates, they didn't really see a reason for a primary to happen, because it didn't seem likely that there would be challengers for the Republican nomination. So one of the interesting things that came out of this debate was that both Bill Weld and Joe Walsh called for Donald Trump's impeachment. And so that might seem like a bad choice politically if you are a person that's actually still in Congress, because a lot of people who are Republicans have chosen to not actually denounce or talk about President Trump's wrongdoings or alleged wrongdoings, because they're so worried about him attacking them. But the important thing to remember, even though this might seem surprising, is that first of all, they're both former members of, like, for Bill Weld, it'd be like the government within Massachusetts. And for Joe Walsh, like the House of Representatives, he was a representative from Illinois. So they're not really up for re-election within like Congress or anything like that. They're just running for the national nomination. So because they're both running on defeating President Trump and the fact that he has such a strong hold on the Republican Party, it kind of makes sense that they're denouncing him and trying to call for impeachment, because they're trying to show that he's done things wrong and that they are a better candidate than President Trump. And so that's why they've both decided to call for his impeachment. And so that's pretty much what's been happening in the Republican and the Democratic election season for 2020. So we always stream on Tuesdays and Thursdays, like Robbie said earlier. And so next Monday, we're going to have a election update and a current event stream. So we'll both be back for that. And then on Tuesday, we're going to have 2 streams at 7 and 8 about the president. And then the last one is happening on Thursday, the 10th, and it's going to be about political socialization and ideology. So that's pretty much how you become who you are in terms of your political views. So we'll talk about more during next week. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them now, and we'll make sure to answer them before we go.
Thanks, everybody, for coming for our very first night. It was awesome.
Oh, okay. So Brandon asks, given that Bill Weld said on Fox News that he could potentially endorse the Democrat if he loses the Republican nomination, doesn't that indicate that the Republican primary does have some impact in the election, even though Trump will most likely win the primaries? So that could potentially have an impact if people like those like independents and like people who consider themselves to be more moderate Republicans, like see that a person who has like identified as a Republican and even ran in the primary is endorsing a Democrat. But Bill Weld doesn't really have that huge of a following on the national level. So maybe if he does garner that, it might have an impact, but it doesn't really seem it at this point in time. He's not really doing a lot to like make that case. Okay, thanks for tuning in, guys.
See you guys. Have a great week. Bye.
Bye.